Okay, talking about reading stuff upstairs, we're going to learn Zohar today. So this is what we're going to start off right away with a Zohar. That's why it's short. It's going to be a Zohar. By the way,
we're going to stop every second. Like what?
By the way, you should know, people don't realize this because they're scared to open up a Zohar. But the Zohar, like Gemara and Medrash, are filled with stories. And that's what we're going to talk about over here. We're not going to be talking about any deep stuff, really, even though some things are going to sound Zohar-like. But it's really going to be a story that happened. A story that happened with Rashbi and his Chavrai. The Zohar part is saying in the Mesupar, Kipam achas, kasher Chavrai, sharash Reb Shimon ben Yochai, hayu etzloi, v'dibru in yanim shal soides ha-Torah, Ra Reb Shimon ben Yochai, ki Rabbi Yossi have a mahar b'milah de alma. He was thinking about worldly matters. In middle, while they were talking in soides ha-Torah, Amal Reb Shimon ben Yochai, Yossi kum ashlim de yuknach. Get up and complete your image, your face, your whole stature. The os chad chaserbach. One letter is missing from you. Later on, we'll bring from the Rebbe's father that was the letter Yud of his name Yossi was missing. Reb Shimon ben Yochai hivchin ki machos Rabbi Yossi hirer b'milah de alma b'nyanei ha'olam nasa chesarim b'dyoikin shaloi v'ois achas mishmoi chaserbach. La'achar mekain, Rabbi Yossi didn't just, okay, I'm a bad boy, but he did something about it. Come Rabbi Yossi arose, v'chadi b'milah da'araisa, and he rejoiced in the words of the Torah, meaning he started learning, he started focusing on his learning. Istachel ben Reb Shimon looked at him, Amar loi, Rabbi Yossi hashta anshlim, now you're complete, v'diyoik nachshlim. Oh, they translate it. Don't know why he doesn't translate the first one, but anyway. Come Rabbi Yossi v'samach divrei Torah, istachel ben Reb Shimon, v'amar le Rabbi Yossi ke'esat ha-shalom, v'diyoik nachshalom. And then it says, Rab Shimon, Amar la'achar mekain Torah al pasuk vayas tzitz gomer. That part, the Rebbe doesn't go into. In the footnote, he says, the Rebbe's father, that was explaining the connection between that and the story. L'chura sipr zetamua b'Yosef. Keitzad yitachin Rab Yossi shayim megdolat hanoim u'behimatzei b'msibes Rab Shimon b'Yochai v'chavrai shaloi ba dibru razi Torah. We're not talking about a kid in Cheder. We're not talking about a kid in school. We're talking about Rabbi Yossi, one of the biggest Tanoim, amongst the Rashbi, and while they were talking Soides HaTorah. The whole story doesn't make sense. Even if if you will find some explanation that must have been some reason why he did so. So then the question is the other way. So either way you have a problem. Either you have a problem because of the issue of what was he doing, or if what he was doing was right, so then why did Reb Shimon ben Yochai tell him that he was missing a letter in his name? Derech Agav, this Sichos is one of the examples where the Rebbe is going to eventually, when we get there, going to make the famous contrast that we always have in Chassidus between Torah versus mitzvahs. I'm just giving you a heads up of where we're going to go with this. There's always the idea, there's Torah greater, there's mitzvahs greater, and there's no one answer. Because Torah, Chassidus, is not something that's like what we call in English linear. It doesn't work like this is here and this is there. Like we always heard from our mashpim when we were growing up, as venzich v'meret. I wonder what they said in Israel. What type of expression did the Israeli mashpim use for it? But by us, I said to myself, I always want to make a bumper sticker as venzich v'meret. Depends what you're talking about. Torah is greater, mitzvahs is greater, Pesach is greater, Rosh Hashanah is greater, this is greater, that's greater. But there's no one approach. In this Sichos, we're going to talk about the greatness of Mitzvos and Mitzvos and Birurim, and on the other hand, how in a certain way Torah is higher than that, and based on that, we're going to be able to explain the story. L'chora yafshel avayir zois hayisoid habir shel avi moidi, the Rebbe's father ba'aroitz of al zoyer kidl kamen siv gimel behegd. Afal pish Rabbi Yossi hoya me'achavrai shel Rab Shimon ben Yochai she'etzlom b'chlal hoysa teirasan umnasam. So that was their general state, that their Torah was their profession, and therefore they weren't mafsik for Torah learning, for davening, and according to the Yerushalmi, not even for Krishma, like we learned in a different Sichos. Baram, who loy haya al koponim b'chol azmanim b'sug zeh shelo oiskin ach v'rak b'Torah shelo pasku milul moed k'dei lasik be'umnes. He wasn't from the group that didn't get involved in a profession, Mila Da'alma. Ukefi shar Gemara Mesaperes, ki Rabbi Yossi shalcha have, which Rashi translates was umman la'abed oiris. That was his profession. He took care of hides. He took animal skins, and he made them into parchment or into other things that had to be made from it. So we find that Rabbi Yossi was not on the level of Terasi and Manasseh of the Rashbi. Another thing we find about Rabbi Yossi, K'moy kein matzinush, Rabbi Yossi haya oisk b'tzarchei tzibur, l'dugma ha'takanas ha'shoynes v'hinig b'tzipoiri. He made certain takanas. So in other words, he wasn't just a private person sitting and learning, he was involved with the tzibur. So these are two occupations, two things that we could explain the milui, the alma, that was occupying his mind. But we'll soon say that the first one doesn't really make sense to say. Parnasa, he wouldn't be thinking about his parnasa and learning. Al pisa nitin levayer ki amila da alma behem here Rabbi Yossi hoy in yom shel tzarchei tzibur. But in footnote 13 he says, obviously, even if he wasn't Torah and Manasseh, he wouldn't be thinking about his business, about how to do his hides and his animal skins in the middle of learning, unless there's something else about it, as we'll see at the end of the Sichos. He stopped for tzarchei tzibur. So how do you know that for tzarchei tzibur you could stop in the middle of learning? Mishum she'esek b'tzarchei tzibur doiche talmud Torah. And the Rebbe brings a proof of this because we know that on the one hand, and we've mentioned this before, we mentioned this in other Sichos, that even the Rashbi and his chaverim that would not be mafsik their Torah learning for Shemoneh Esrei, for Tefillah, but they were mafsik for Kriyas Shema. But someone that's oisik b'tzarchei tzibur, the Gemara says, is not even mafsik for Kriyas Shema. So you see that tzarchei tzibur is even greater than Torah learning. Therefore, Rabbi Yossi was okay with being mafsik in the middle of learning because he was thinking about matters of tzarchei tzibur. Bekach nitin kam levayer, madua b'chol still. I'm sorry. Alpizan, I skipped a line. I'm holding in the middle of the third paragraph. Sorry. V'lechein hifsek avuram be'emtza shmiyas razei toirim shmiyas b'tzarchei tzibur b'derech talmud Torah. We said that already. Okay. So now we explained one side of the equation. One side of the question was, how did Rabbi Yossi do such a thing? In the middle of listening to Razei Torah together with the Rashbi, he's going to stop to think about tzarchei tzibur. He's going to stop about Milah D'Alma. Says this was tzarchei tzibur. Tzarchei tzibur is doiche talmud Torah. But then we have the other problem. If so, if he did have a good reason to stop, why did the Rashbi tell him you're missing a letter from your name? Kach niten gam levayer madua b'chol zois nechzrai de kach ois achas mishmoi ki zeh she'isuk b'tzarchei tzibur doiche talmud Torah hu b'shvil to'elas v'toivas harabim ach b'oisik b'tzarchei tzibur atzmoi yechoyla lehivatzer ki toitzah mi'esas gezu yirida ad she'achazal oimrim hatel aleim tzarchei tzibur ve'in kolim aleim. It says concerning Eldad and Medad that were misnabim b'machna and became running to Moshe Rabbeinu, Adoni Moshe Kloim, So he said, if you give him to take care of tzarchei tzibur, that itself will make them lose out. In other words, even though it's allowed, and even though it is doiche, tzarchei tzibur pushes away the idea of Talmud Torah, but the person himself that is involved in tzarchei tzibur still and all becomes lowered by it. And this is that type of, you can't line things up and say, this is higher and that's higher. True, tzarchei tzibur pushes away Talmud Torah. But l'poyel, the person that's involved in tzarchei tzibur, it's in a way, it's a Mesiras Nefesh, because in the end, he himself, even though he's doing a good thing, he's losing from it. The Rebbe is going to bring later on the examples that it's Benegay Mordechai. Right now, actually, is later. He's going to bring about Mordechai. Mordechai can do Pamarucha Shenishar Mishnah Melech. After the Gezeira with Haman, he still remained a Mishnah Melech Tachashverish. Ki Yosef Batel Medivre Torah v'Nichs L'Srara Hayel L'Toivas Klal Yisrael. Davar Hadoicha Talmud Torah, like we said, Tzarchei Tzibur pushes away Talmud Torah, so that's why it was okay for Mordechai to remain a Mishnah Melech. V'im Zois Paul Adavar Etzloi Yarad Mechashivusei Et Chachamim, like the Gemara says over there, that in one pasuk he's enumerated the fourth one in the number of Chachamim, Nevi'im, and on a later pasuk he's the fifth place. Why is he listed in the fifth place, not in the fourth place? Because since he became Mishnah Melech, so he was Yarad Mechashivusei, he was lowered. Mishum shenechsar etzlei ha'ilui v'agadol shel Talmud Torah. The Rebbe a lot of times used to, by Purim Fabrengens, I remember the Rebbe often used to say, where it's brought down, the Ratzui l'roiv echav. It says about Mordechai that he was accepted by or beloved by most of his brothers. The same idea, because it says Pirish Remenu Mitzvos Sanhedrin. A small amount of Sanhedrin left him, didn't want to have to do with him, or didn't have the same association with him. Why? Because now Mordechai was involved not in the world of Torah, even though he was right doing so. So the same thing we can explain concerning Rabbi Yossi, that while he was sitting by the Rashbi, even though he was allowed to go ahead and be involved in matters of the world, because it was Tzarchei Tzibur, it was needs of the community and so on. But on the other hand, the Rashbi looked at him and said, you're missing the letter Yud from your name. You're missing something in your name because L'poil in you, it causes a Yerida. Hezber zeh, L'koach gam b'yuri shal avi moiri ba'arois v'al sefer hazoyer, al sipur zeh, shezeh sherab Yossi hirer b'milin de alma, the Rebbe's father says, ein mashmoi hirur shal dvarim b'telim chas v'shalom, ki im hoya zeh inyan shal amal sicha shu davar gadol. He's going to explain what this amal sicha is, based on a Maimer Chazal. There's a Maimer Chazal about a pasuk that says a person was born for amal, for toil, for work. Okay, meduber pam ba'arucha bebir Maimer Chazal adam la'amal yulad. So the Chazal say a very interesting thing. Ein yadem la'amal Torah im la'amal sicha. Have a oimer la'amal Torah nivra. That's the Chazal say. What's this amal sicha? We have two things, Torah versus Sicha. That means the Chachamim hold that Sicha is somewhere on the same level like Torah, and they're in doubt. You can't just talk about the Stam Dvarim B'Telim. Mezeg gufisha b'Torah's emes oila asvara ki adam nivra l'Amal Sicha muvan shezoi avoid and nilis. V'yiseirim izo gam lefia maskana shel Amal Torah nivra ein hadavar shoyl l'gamri sa'inyan shel Amal Sicha. The Chum don't say that Amal Sicha is bad. It just says, what was he created for? He was created for Amal Torah. Ki she'im she'amal Sicha levadoi ein etachas b'rias adam. V'adrabe k'dei la'agi l'tachas b'li'ili shel Amal Torah chayeves liyis koidem ha'avoida shel Amal Sicha. And the footnote he brings down, here he's going to talk Amal Sicha a little bit differently. So here he's going to explain Amal Sicha a little bit differently. But in the footnote he's going to bring down that Amal Sicha means talking to the Eibishter. That's what it means, Amal Sicha. So therefore it's understood how Amal Sicha might not be as great as Amal Torah. Davening may not be as great as learning. Like we said, Torah Sim Nasai doesn't have to daven. But still in all, by a regular person, so his Torah, Amal, should be the way it's supposed to be, he needs to have davening before him. But over here, we're going to speak about a little bit of a different concept of Amal Sicha. As we know, everything the person down here does, he causes above. So when we say that a person does the avoid of Amal Sicha down here, so in a similar way, it's done above. What's the Amal Sicha by the Eibishter? When do we find that the Eibishter speaks? When he creates the world. Shakadosh Baruch Hu yoymar kiviyachos asara amara shebehem nivra ha'olam. When a Yid does Amal Sicha, so that's where it caused by Hashem also, to speak the world into existence. Kifish mevayir, Rabbeinu Azak Betanyim, she'asara amaras milabashes tamid ba'olam l'sav v'usay, u'lach yoyse l'kaimay, v'zeu ha'pirush al-milad ha'alma. This also fits in with what it says, the Lashon of the Zohar, that Rabbi Yossi have a maharer b'milad ha'alma. If it's Sarchei Tzibur, why are you calling it matters of the world or words of the world? Because it's such matters that make a kiyum for the world, just like the Asara Ma'amaris is considered things that bring the world into existence. Asara Ma'amaris b'hem nivra ha'olam, u'melubashes by v'nikroim milda yoita in Zohar. And Chassidus brings this down, that it says, Lav urcha de malcha li'ishtoy b'milda yoita. It's not the derech of the king to be involved in mundane words or mundane matters, hedyot words, which means that to be involved in the creation of the world for the Eibishter is a yirida for him. It's a descent for him. But in that same way, for Rabbi Yossi it was a descent, but by doing that Amal Sicha, he was bringing kiyum to the world. He was bringing existence to the world. So now the Rebbe says, what does that mean in our world idea of Amal Sicha? Like I said before, in the footnote, he speaks about Amal Sicha going on davening. But in our world, Mashmas Dvarim Beis Shel Avoda Maharer B'Milad Alma Amal Sicha Hi Avoda Shel Birurim Levarer Ulezacher Chesenyone Ha'olam Befrat Aide Avoda Shekol Masecha Yil Shem Shomayim Chol Derechecha Do'eyu. In other words, it could be mevared the world through mitzvahs. You use tefillin, you put on a mezuzah. These are physical things that you're being mevared the world with. But especially, the real amal sicha, the real birur of the world, is when you take in yoneh reshus, permitted matters, birur v'zichuch in yoneh reshus shel ha'adam, milad alma. That still matters of the world. If it's tefillin, if it's mezuzah, if it's something like that, you can't really call it milad alma. It's after all something holy. So what's the true milad alma, matters of the world? When you use your own worldly things, your own permitted things for kedusha. Because the person is involved in amal sicha down here, he causes the sicha of above, the asara amaras of above, to be mekayim the world.
Why is it called sicha? If sicha is dibur.
Sichos dibur, because it's the sicha of above. Mil in the alma, you see, it's an interesting thing. It doesn't say the word sicha over there in the Zohar. It says mil in the alma. So the word mil is like the word dvarim in Lashon Kodesh. It could mean matters or it could mean words. Achin kol zois, einza ba'erech le'inyan shel amar Torah. With the whole mile, like we said before about Tzarchei Tzibur, it's greater and it's doicha. So the same way over here, Birurim, refining the world, Kol Masechel Yishem Shemaim, Kol Rechecha De'eyu, is still not in the same level like Amal Torah, Befrat Soidis V'Rozia Torah, Ki Agam Shaydei Amal Sicha Nifal Kiyum Ha'olam, Bem Tzaz HaSara Amaris, and not just that it makes the Kiyum Ha'olam, V'Yiseilim Azu, HaKavana B'Yiridus Hashem Alamatihi, Loi L'Sakin Atzmo. It could sit and learn Torah in Gan Eden also. That's not why it came down here. The emphasis on this portion of the world, to refine the world. Specifically of the world, so even though that is a necessary and main reason for the entire creation, still in all alpha became Amal Torah hinay nailam amal sicha mishum shu mamshich es ha'oira aleki hanayla min ha'olam. And he says this is the idea of Torah Siminasi as well. In the footnote, v'lechein nasa chisarim b'shmoi shel Rabbi Yossi kasher hira remila de alma mishum shezoy yiridel gabe inyan amal Torah shaloi. In other words, this is what we see about the maila of Torah versus mitzvahs. The Rebbe says, he's mitzayin over here somewhere, I don't remember which footnote he's mitzayin in. He's mitzayin to Sich and Chelik Daled, where we know that the 4 minim correspond to 4 different types of Eden. the esrog, yesh betam v'reach. It goes on those that do mitzvahs and learn Torah. The Arav doesn't have neither, so it's neither. The Hadas has reach, so they have the idea of mitzvahs. And the lulav, which has date palms, it's dates, so that has to do with tam. And the Rebbe asks, or brings down the Gemara, why do we make the bracha on the tilos lulav? Why don't we make it on all the dalad minim or on the esrog? So he says, because the lulav is the tallest. So the Rebbe says, the lulav is the tallest, that's all fine and good. But everything begashmius comes from ruchnius. So if the lulav is the tallest down here, it must be because the concept of only Torah is higher than even the esrog, that's a combination of Torah and mitzvahs. So the Rebbe says, obviously when we're talking about only Torah, it's not talking about someone that's not doing mitzvahs. Of course he's doing mitzvahs, because the Rosh Amar Malachal Saper Chukai, you can't just learn Torah without doing mitzvahs. There's a different maimed that I was learning this week with people. It says, in a similar way, where it says, the Gemara asks if Talmud Gadol or Maisa Gadol. Of course, Friedrich Rebbe Maimer says this. Talmud Gadol, the Gemara is not saying learning alone. Obviously he's talking about learning, and you're doing mitzvahs that you're supposed to do. What we're talking about here, about the lulav, or the Talmud Gadol, is talking about just doing the basic amount of mitzvahs, and the rest of the time, you're focused just on learning. So, we say that's higher. And that is the one that you make a bracha on. Even though the kavanah, we said, and the reason why the neshama came down here was to refine the world and elevate the world and so on, still and all, on the lulav we make the bracha. So the same thing over here. Rabbi Yossi, even though he was supposed to be involved in Bilda Alma, that was the purpose, and that was the kavanah, was doichet Torah and everything, but still in all, it was chaser boy. He was lacking, he was missing. So now the Rebbe is going to be medayik a little bit more about this. Ach, ba'omek Yosser adayin ein zebir masbik al kach she'ois chad chaser bach. You're missing a letter. In your name, there's a missing letter. Hanhagas hatanoim v'amaroim hoisa behesem l'shoyrish shmasam. Like for example, right away in the beginning of Tanya Dal, the Rebbe says, Beis Hillel was from Chesed, and that's why they were noigim lahakel and lahatir. Beis Shammai from Mitzvah Gvura, and that's why they did their things that way. The same thing over here. Benidin the Dan. Zeshe dafke Rabbi Yossi here b'milda alma. Who kebir avi moiri, like the Rebbe's father explained, mishum sharab Yossi u'bechinas hamalchus. That was the sphere that he was representing. Shehi ha'makar lo'ilmus bri yitzirasiyah. Ha'mishavim asar ha'mar shal spheres hamalchus. Spheres hamalchus is the level of Dvar Hashem. That's the asar ha'mar, is to create the world. L'chein avidasei he being shalom al-sicha v'kiyam oilam. He reflected midas hamalchus, similar to what's brought down often in Chassidus, that Avraham Avinu was the level of midas chesed atzilus, and therefore that was his avodah. His avodah was nachlas orchim, and he was trying to defend stoim and all these different types of things. The same thing, Rabbi Yossi was the level of Sfiras HaMalchus. Sfiras HaMalchus is the level of Hashem's speech that creates the world. So his avodah was involved in the world. So therefore, if his avodah was involved in the world, so why would he be missing something? Umekiven sheshlichus sh'Rabbi Yossi ba'al madei misbatas ba'avodah shel amal sicha im kei heina meshba amal Torah kayim ilu gadol legabi amal sicha. Why? Mishum shat Torah nailas min ha'olam. Beram keitzad niten loimer ki beglal sh'Rabbi Yossi have mahara b'milda alma yivatzer chisarim b'shem shaloi. His name has to reflect his level. His level was about dealing in the world. Why would it be missing in his name? His name was fine, because that was his avodah. Sheshema adam mechuvan lebechinas nishmasai. B'shah shezoi avodasei musamis l'neshama shaloi v'meil l'shmai. Al derech ha'imra yidua b'shem Reb Zusha ma'anapolo shalo yitvu oisem adu b'loya b'dargos min tzadikim gedolim. But rather, they'll ask him, Lamadua, ein Zusha, the same thing. Why would Rabbi Yossi be missing a letter in his name? Zois v'oid Rebbe Im ipnei shaloi haya loya ilu shalavoid noisefes. Nasa chisarim b'shmoi. If that is what it's going to cause, so what's going to happen? We are very careful not to make anybody feel bad over something that's not in their control. Like the right away at the beginning of Tanya. He will feel bad. It's not in his control. It's not his choice to be involved in Torah versus being involved in mitzvahs. This is the level of his neshama. So you're still going to make him feel bad? So then he's going to be missing. He'll feel bad that he wasn't Zoicha to be able to have the level of Teratzim Nasi. Is it his fault? This is what he was meant to do. Why do you need someone else to tell him? So when he did start being involved in learning, why did I have to go through the Rashbi? If this was meant for him, so he himself should have known. Rabbi Yossi mitzad atzmai, zaysameres bahesem la'oifen by tzricha liyes ha'avoida shaloi mitzad shoyresh and shmasoi, harei hirhurai b'mile da alma lo'ihiva lididoi chesan. You're right. There was nothing wrong with it. He wasn't missing anything. Va'adraba kanal avidosai ubemele diyoikne v'shmoi hayu b'shleimus. He wouldn't have been missing. He's not missing anything in his diyoikin, in his image, in his name. Hachisorin shenigrim loy hoya bi'inyone ke'echad me'achavrayed Rab Shimon bar Yochai. Rab Shimon bar Yochai shetarasi u'manasi k'lakaman inyan shayatzarech liyes eitzel Rab Yossi gamba oisesha. You see the emphasis of the words me'achavrayed Rab Shimon bar Yochai. When he's in Rab Shimon bar Yochai's group, when he's together with Rab Shimon, so he's like supposed to be now, at this time at least, on the level of Rab Shimon's Torah Nasai. V'lechein davke Rab Shimon bar Yochai roish hachavraya hayayachal lahafchin b'chisaron zeitzel Rab Yossi, and also the opposite. V'gam lahafchin kasher hachisaron hushlam l'achar mekain, because Rab Yossi on his own, it was not a chisaron, it was only a chisaron as being part of that group. This is a very interesting thing because the Alter Rebbe brings us down in Nigla. The following piece is not something that says Nechsidis and Tanya and Amorim. It's in Halachos of Talmud Torah, which is a Nigla chibur of the Alter Rebbe. Ki kol nefesh, the emphasis on kol nefesh tzricha letikuna laseik bepshat remes drush soid. Every part of Torah kfish ma'yichol lahasik. Not everybody's able to grasp every part of Torah in the same way, but it doesn't mean that we are released from the obligation to learn every part of Torah. If he doesn't have this knowledge in Pshat Remes Drush side, and even more so, what happens if the person didn't? So the Alter Rebbe says in Nigla, ve'echad asher nis'atzav lo yhisig v'yoda al ma'at. So but the expression of the Alter Rebbe, the Rebbe is going to be medayik, is nis'atzel. He's missing a part of knowledge and Torah because he was lazy. What happens if there's other reasons why he didn't learn Torah? Einay mitzad atzlus, ela mishum shalpi Torah hareu poter mitalmud Torah. Omer Rabbeinu zaken b'Torah oir, ki b'mikra kazeh yecholim liyas shnei efanim. Aleph, zu gufa hira, sha'aneshama shaloi shayeches liyaser. U'b'meila eina zekuka liyaser. Hasagas ha-Torah. V'lechein hi magia l'shleimus shalom gam b'limud muat ad afilu ba'ofen shal perik echad shachris or perik echad arvis. The Rebbe, I think, answered certain people that felt bad or whatever, that they weren't sitting in koil all day, etc. If there are people that still feel bad about this. And the Rebbe explained to them, or said b'chlal, that adrabah, that person that's sitting in koil, the fact that he was given this opportunity, Maila, is an indication that this is what his neshama needs. And this is what he needs for his shleimus. And if he wastes a minute of his time in koil, not learning the full whatever, 12 hours, 8 hours, 10 hours, whatever it is, so then his neshama will be lacking. From the fact that you, the Eibishter, did not give that opportunity, and you have to fulfill your chiyuv and limud Torah the way it says in the halacha, you have to learn in the morning, you have to learn at night, and with this you're moyotze the chiyuv. So that means that once you've done that, that is enough for your neshama. Your neshama doesn't need any more. That's one approach that the Alter Rebbe says in Torah. You don't need any more. Then there's a second approach. Base. Whatever he's missing, whatever he doesn't reach, the Eibishter is going to complete for him. Not he's not responsible, but the Eibishter will help him out. So the Alter Rebbe in Torah just says these two options, but he doesn't explain where it applies. The Rebbe now is going to explain it depends what the situation is, why he doesn't have the opportunity to learn Torah. Im zamishum shu asuk beheter valpi Torah binyan parnasa v'kiyotze b'zeh binyan mapratim shaloi harezu hayrash and nishmasa eina shayeches l'mare Torah. He's not part of that group that they're supposed to be masters of Torah. Elo l'mare uvdin tovim. His job is to be the masters of good maisim, of tovim, of mitzvahs. He eina shayeches kol kach la'asagus ha-Torah v'lachein maspik lo limit Torah perek echad shachris perek echad arvis. That is, a person like that gets like the first thing that the Alter Rebbe said in Torah. Ach imu asik ubeheter al Torah binyanim shlachedim tzedakah v'kiyotze b'zeh ubefrat v'tzarchi tzibur hadoichin talmud Torah mitzad toivas v'tel sarabim azay museges shleimusay ba'oifen boy HaKadosh Baruch Hu ma shlemes ma shehechsir v'loi kibel b'emtzos limudei v'asagos ha-Torah Koilol gamba oifen shu mevarech oisai ba'atzlacha meruba b'limud ha-Torah. It's not just like some spiritual thing that the Eibishter gives him, that he gets some spiritual thing. Literally, his Torah learning down here is much more successful. I just want to bring in something else. The Rebbe doesn't say this over here, but kach shebizman more to mask b'Torah mashal derech harol leitzarech lemashich zman rav. The Rebbe often used to bring by Fabrenges and says that Kala Isaac, someone that's involved in Gmil's Chasadim, his brain and his heart become refined 1,000 times as much. The Rebbe used to talk about this, Mitzvos and so on. And the Rebbe said that this means kipshutay. I remember hearing the Rebbe once saying, this means literally, it's not just a nice expression 1,000 times as much. But what would take another person 1,000 hours to learn, a person that helps another Yid, he will learn it in 1 hour. That's the Rebbe saying over here. It's not just the Eibishter being mashlim in the spiritual level. In the physical world down here, he will accomplish much more in his small amount of Torah learning because he's involved in Tzarchei Tzibur, because he's involved in helping another. Al derech ma shekasa b'Yerushalmi, b'negel chasidim harishonim shoyeshoyin u'mispalim tes shoyes b'yoyim. The Yerushalmi and also the Bavli, but we'll soon say why the Rebbe points out the Yerushalmi. The chasidim harishonim, there was tefillas ha'amidah, tefillas Shemoneh Esrei. So they would take an hour to prepare for Shemoneh Esrei, an hour for Shemoneh Esrei, and an hour to come down from Shemoneh Esrei. You have 3 Shemoneh Esreis in a regular day, that's 9 hours a day. So the Gemara asks, both in the Yerushalmi and the Bavli, and asks, so if they're doing that all day, what would happen with their Torah learning? When would they be learning Torah? So the Yerushalmi says, Ayidei shahayu chsidim haisa bracha nitenes b'Torasan. What does it mean, bracha nitenes b'Torasan? Zepal sheitzlichu lahavin ulahaskel miyad v'loy hayu shoyin. It did not take extra time. In the short amount of time of learning, they accomplished as much as someone would need a long time. The Rebbe used to many years explain that there's a difference here between the Yerushalmi and the Bavli. In the Bavli, he says, it would be kept, they wouldn't forget the Torah. But the Yerushalmi says that there would be a bracha in their Torah. Mishtameres just means that whatever they learned was kept. Here, the Rebbe is bringing from Yerushalmi, but negeh to this Inyan, it's negeh what the Yerushalmi's expression is. Not just that the Torah is Mishtameres, but the Torah is Misbareches, it's gebenched, it's matzliach so much more in the small amount of time. Okay, here he brings that Maimer Chazal that I was saying before. Like I said, the Rebbe said it means literally. I remember hearing this by the Rebbe Shebrengen. It literally means what takes someone else 1,000 hours to learn, it would take him an hour to learn. Al Pisa nit levayr gamas hasipur amr bezoyar. Uvde shrab shim bechoy hifchin. Ki eitz rab yosi chas eis mishmai. Ubefrat kefi shmavayr of imoyri shoyse zu eis yud shol yosi. Shehi keneged yud shol shem avayim. Hameira ba'olam ha'atzilus. Not the level of Malchus, the way it comes down. Malchus has to do with the worlds of Biyah, we said before, but it's Yud has to do with Atzilus. Uba'avoidas ha'adam za'oa inyan shal amal Torah. Yud shal Shem Havaya also has to do with Chachma, Yiraisa Machachmat Nafkis. Ubefrat Soidas ha'Torah, that's the type of avoid he was involved in. Hanayla me'amal sicha asara amaras makar ilmus bri yitzir asiyam. V'amal Torah hareu inyan shal Shem Bayachai, Tarasim Nasai. He wasn't just Stam Torah. He was a master of the secrets of the Torah, so it wasn't just any Torah. So Haisa Hechacha Vahira Ki Achshav Nidresh Mirab Yosi Sheyis'ala Mavidose B'Mila Da Alma V'Yase Ke'eis B'Amal Torah U'Ba'oifen Shel Chavraid Rab Shimba Yechoi Tarasim Nasi. Now, the experience he had to have now while sitting with Rab Shimba Yechoi was to completely remove himself from that. Yushlam bekach kol masher yitzarech lekabel idei limudei v'asagas ha'Torah bizman shei maharer b'milah da'alma. The Rebbe says an interesting thing. This idea that the Eibishter will be mashlim, not just doesn't ask more, but complete and add to the person's Torah learning, could be dependent on an Eis Ratzon. That time when Rabbi Yossi was sitting in front of Rashbi was an Eis Ratzon. It was an auspicious time for him to be able to receive this. So Rashbi told him, don't mess up, don't miss out this opportunity. Meaning that it also completed and fixed what happened in the past as well, meaning what you weren't able to learn earlier because you were involved in Tzarchei Tzibur, now you are able to fix up, or at least what you weren't able to learn earlier because you were being Maharer B'Milah Da'alma, all of it is elevated now, all of it is fulfilled, not just that you don't need anymore, but you have that Maila as well. And here we see again that there's this type of, what we call in a lot of times in English, this tension, what it's called. On the one hand, Torah is higher. On the other hand, mitzvahs is something that does the dir b'tachtoinim and does the birurim. And each one is necessary. The Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, in the Perchav Gimel, speaks about how Ayraisa v'kutsha b'richu kulachad. Torah and the Eibishter are entirely one. But mitzvahs, Ramach Pikudin, Ramach Ivar the Malkum. Mitzvahs is only like limbs. Now, organs and limbs are only a levush for the neshama. It's not totally one. Torah is totally one. So with all the milos of mitzvahs that I'm elevating the world and I'm doing birurim and so on, but it doesn't come to the higher level that with Torah I have a union with Hashem, a yichud shein yichud kamayu, like the Alter Rebbe says in Perek Hey and Tanya, that the union that happens with a yid, with Hashem, with Torah, no mitzvah can accomplish that. Would a person come down here in this world only for Torah? No. He has to come down to do Amal Sicha. He has to come down to be Mevar of the world. But still in all, it's not the same holiness, it's not the same connection with the Eibishter like when he learns Torah.